Well, hi. Welcome to Cambridge Inside
We almost didn't
Out.
go on, but that's
There
right.
you go. I'm Robert Winters.
Judy Nathans.
And today's April 2nd, the day after April Fool's Day.
It's
And
my mom's birthday. She would have been 95.
there you
Yeah.
go.
But
So, it's some people actually wait on April Fool's expecting I'm going to write an April
Oh.
Fool's version of this Cambridge Civic Journal, but
you weren't in the mood this week.
I wasn't
no.
in the mood.
You're not in a good
Definitely
mood,
wasn't in the
Robert.
mood.
I know. Robert's
Yeah.
having overlay problems.
I'm having overlay issues, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
And actually that, again, I don't want to obsess on that one, but the thing is that the this so-called 100% affordable housing overlay proposal or district or whatever they want to call it
Proposal.
is still, in its current version where they replaced the FAR standard for how much additional density they want to grant certain parties.
Can you explain what they're using of urban form or
You know,
form-based? What does that mean?
I'm not going to claim any expertise at
Well,
all.
what's the word they're using?
form-based. It's called
Form-based
form-based
zoning?
zoning.
Okay,
yeah.
what does that mean?
I can't really say. I'd have to really ask somebody else to say that a little better.
But they're
than I
using it
could.
now where they didn't use it before. So
You know what? I'll just express my
Okay.
own point of view about
Yeah.
it, which is that when they expressed this proposal, this overlay proposal in terms of FAR, it included things like out in resident B districts where the permissible residential floor area ratio, FAR, was 0.5. They would say, but if you were one of these housing developers, you could build to 2.0, which was 4 times the
So
density.
that means you increase the FAR upward though, not on the ground, right?
No, all around.
Oh,
I mean,
all
it's
around.
it's
So
the
no
total
setback.
amount of floor per,
Oh,
floor,
wow.
the
Okay.
percentage, basically, if it was 0.5, you could build,
5 times more?
no, if it was 0.5, you could
Yeah.
build, which is, I think, very low density. That
Yeah.
would be, so that's
2
not,
stories?
that's actually relatively, that's like the western part of Cambridge.
Okay.
You could build a 2-story house on a 25% of the lot, so that leaves a lot of open space on the lot.
Okay.
Right? I live in a residence C1 district, which is 0.75, so you could go 3/4 of the lot, or more typically do 3/8 of the lot, a two-story, two-family,
Okay.
two-story building,
All right.
or you could be a triple-decker. A lot of the housing is actually,
Triple.
it
decker.
predates the zoning code,
Right.
so a lot of the building wouldn't be permissible by today's standards.
True. The
Which to me
setbacks
makes a
would be
good
different.
argument why generally they should be a little more liberal about density standards all across the board.
Okay.
But but what they're proposing is to say only certain parties can build,
Right.
it-
So it would go
under
from
this.
0.5 to what?
Well,
what would be the
the
max?
original proposal was like,
Yeah.
in a resident B with 0.5 up to 2.0, which is quadrupling the density.
That's 4 times the
Right,
amount.
and to
Wow.
accommodate some of that, they would relax some of the setback requirements on the side and the front
Yeah.
and rear of the lot.
Mhm.
So basically, you'd have a pretty big box kind of cramming up,
Without
taking up
having.
a lot of the lot, right?
What
Since
about height?
they would allow
limited
additional
on
height
it.
as well.
But
but-
only a certain amount, right?
Right. Now under the latest version of this, where they started using all this language of form-based
Of
zoning,
form-based, yeah.
what they did is, and again, pardon my cynicism, but I believe the reason why they switched that is so that they wouldn't have to put strict numerical values to anything. Because, and then I think they thought it would sound less controversial. Oh no, we're doing something innovative. We're doing form-based zoning.
But no one knows what
But
that is.
nobody knows what it is. And the truth is, and Dennis
Yeah.
Carlone, I think very correctly, has
Yeah,
said,
well,
look, if you want to actually do a switch to more of a form-based zoning way of doing things, that's a discussion that's going to take a good long time.
Right.
That's not something you just willy-nilly throw in there because
He
of
said that
convenience.
last night, didn't he?
He said it,
Yeah.
I think, at a previous meeting
Oh,
as
okay.
well. And he's correct. But what the thing is that it would allow, though, I mean, under the current version, there would be places where, like, and I just give my own personal example where in my area, which is a mixed residential commercial, you can build 0.75 residential, 1.0 commercial, right? So, for example, there's a building next to me that is actually it's just one tall story, but it covers maybe 80% of the entire lot.
Dwell time used to be,
Yeah,
where now it's
yeah,
another.
and it has no setbacks whatsoever.
Right.
So I said, well, what would be permissible under your brilliant new idea? And basically they said, well, sure, we could put about a 4 or 5 story building
Wow.
that builds out lot line to lot line, covering 85% of the entire lot. Essentially, under this proposal, they could basically put a gigantic wall about 5 feet away from every
Well,
window
the
in
alley
house.
couldn't go away though.
No, because that's on my property, but the thing
That's
is,
a
there
street-
would,
yeah,
there would be
okay.
no setback whatsoever on the adjacent property,
Uh-huh.
and, you know, and honestly, it scares the daylights out of me. And and I'll be honest, I mean, I feel betrayed by the city councilors. The fact that they're just continuing to proceed willy-nilly
Well,
without.
not all of them. I mean, there's
Well, I
been some
mean,
policy
all right,
letters that
I'm
are,
going
you
to give
know.
a big shout out to Jan Devereaux. Jan Devereaux has actually been the one person who's actually been pretty clear in raising issues. There was a city council order last night from councilors Devereaux, Carlone, and Zondervan, which basically asked the city to come back with a lot more explanation. But I think there are some fundamental problems with this whole proposal, the way it's been phrased, and how it even came to be. And I haven't heard any of the councilors really question that. You know, and you know, there are some of us who actually feel that they really need to go back to the drawing board and just rethink this fresh.
I guess it's maybe it was public commenters that made some about this whole envision thing, and all we're hearing is this and what happened to all the other
You know,
stuff.
I have served on city
Yeah.
boards and commissions since I think 1986 or 1987.
Yeah.
So it's now, what is that,
Yeah.
over 30 years?
Yeah, me too.
I mean, it's a
Yeah.
scary notion, right?
Yeah.
Over 30 years. And I have put my all into it. I have the best attendance record in every committee I ever
Yes.
sat on. And, you know, and to me, it was always a good process. When Bob Healy was city manager, it was satisfying. When Richie Rossi was, when he was deputy city manager, was often the point person with a lot of these boards. I served on the Library 21 committee. Richie was sort of the point person. You really got the sense that it was a collaborative process, that what you said was being heard. And if you had good ideas, they would find their way into the report. When I was on the Green Ribbon Open Space Committee, I made ideas which made it into the text and are actually being implemented today. You know, I've served 3 years on this Envision Cambridge board. I feel like it was a complete, total waste of my time and everybody else's time in the entire
city's money
city.
too.
Yeah,
Oh.
and I think the only things that have come out of it are basically things that bubbled up from certain individual city staff members who basically used the entire process as cover.
Wow.
Do I sound a little bitter? I think
Yeah.
I am a little bitter, actually. You know, the thing is my time has some value, and honestly, you know,
That was a waste,
and
yeah.
and I also served on the housing working group that supposedly came up with this proposal. I made a lot of suggestions, and honestly, this was absolutely a waste of my time and everybody's time.
Did you see this coming when you were on those meetings? Did
I
you
saw
see this
I
coming?
saw the original version of this overlay.
Yeah.
As proposed, and I spoke out about it right then and there. It was then brought in front of the full Envision Cambridge Advisory Committee, which is what I'm really on, and that's
Right.
why I was sort of a representative on the Housing Working Group.
Right.
And it was panned. It was just,
It was panned in the advisory committee?
Yeah, now granted, the
Oh.
thing is that 20-ish number of members who are on that, you know, they don't all show up, but of
Right.
the people who continue to show up, it was soundly panned.
So how come it wasn't paid attention to?
Well, there's my resentment, is that I really
well,
feel...
you know what? The word advisory is very important.
I understand
you have
that,
no
but-
real say.
But you know, the thing is that
Yeah.
at least you would be heard,
Yeah.
and if there were reasons for objection, people would hear it, and there would be a feedback mechanism, and
Yeah.
things would be improved.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't feel that anything positive came of it, you know, and it's a real railroad job that's going on there, and it's bothering me a lot. Yeah.
Well, the fact that it's happening in an election year, I think, means that this is not going to
Well,
go very
It's not
far
going to go
very soon.
well. I don't know about that because
Really?
right now there are some of the new candidates. So basically, you know, and
But none of the incumbents so far are leaving.
all of the incumbents are playing or tiptoeing around this.
Not all of them.
Some of them are just emphatic, like the mayor, you know,
Right,
and
but other
his
than
little
I don't know. I think
soliloquies.
you've got Carlone and Zondervan and Deborah
No, I mean,
that are
listen,
questioning it.
My
And,
hope
you know,
is
and
that
Kelly, maybe?
and there's a lot of political realignments going on here. I
Yes,
got to be
there
really
are.
clear
yeah,
about this.
it's true. Yeah.
You know, some of the councilors who I was not particularly fans of, I'm actually finding to be the only ones
Yeah.
who are speaking reasonably now. And people who I used to think of as friends, at this point, I wouldn't want to eat dinner with them.
Whoa.
You know,
That's strong.
I really do feel betrayed by
I'll
that.
have dinner with whoever that is.
Right.
I like free dinners.
You know.
But
So anyway, I mean, I'm hoping that
Yeah.
some combination of
something, I mean, maybe some modification. If you think if there was modification of this, it could be worked
You know,
out. Like maybe not as of right, number one.
You know,
and,
I actually, that concerns me more
yeah.
than anything,
Really?
because if you basically start off with something which has some fundamental flaws in the whole way
Yeah.
it's conceptualized, and then you just try and say, and you make a little concession.
Oh,
like-
you see a modification as a concession?
Well, you make a little concession, you know, so for example, Councilor Zondervan said, well, then maybe this should only apply along certain major streets
Corridors, yeah.
and not the others. In other words, great, my political constituents here would not be affected, but the thing is that if you happen to be like I do, live on Broadway,
Which is
like,
sort of
well, let's
a-
concentrate the entirety of
'Cause you
this
have a
just
bus
on,
route, yeah.
on people like me, you know. There's another thing too. Actually, Patrick Barrett pointed out he wrote a really nice letter to the city council. He wrote it late, so it wasn't part of the package.
Will it be in, is it a communication?
Yeah, yeah. So
maybe
it
next
should,
week?
well, it probably will appear amongst the communications, but
Okay.
after the fact, you know. But he was really emphatic, and this is a person who normally wants more density around the city
Right.
generally.
Right.
But he really felt that this entire proposal was just insulting to people.
Wow.
Basically, and I raised this issue with the Housing Working Group. I said, explain to me how a person who lives in a property and wanted to make a small extension on the house was subjected to a very extensive
Yeah.
variance procedure and maybe didn't
Awful.
get it.
Yeah.
All because he wanted to make a modest
And
improvement.
one neighbor would object, and then the whole
and then
thing, yeah,
and the
right.
house of cards goes tumbling down. So,
Right.
so now
Yeah.
the neighbor sells his property to one of these companies like Justice Start, and then they build to 4 or 5 times the density
And they have no
with
right
no
to say anything.
setbacks, and
Yeah.
you have no right to say a thing.
Yeah, it goes from
I
one
mean,
extreme
you
to
know,
the other.
this is insulting
Right, yeah.
to
I-
residential property owners in this
Yeah,
city. And
yeah.
I'm not speaking as a person who somehow feels that
Yeah.
that all of the permitted densities in this city are exactly as they should be. I
No.
don't feel that way at all.
Right, exactly.
I mean, there was back in the late 1990s, there was this great Cambridge Residents for Growth Management who wanted to downzone, you know, lower the allowable densities. And I didn't think that was right. I thought
Right.
they shouldn't be made artificially low beyond what
Right.
the built environment really is,
Right.
you know? But they wanted to lower everything.
Yeah.
And some of the zoning petitions that have actually come up since have actually put back in a spotty kind of way some of the
Yes,
density
it's
that
true.
was removed from that.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't think that zoning densities should be this sort of permanent state of affairs. You know, but this notion that, you know, because you've got a particular priority about getting some more subsidized housing to the city, that somehow you're supposed to just completely obliterate all zoning standards whatsoever. I mean, you know, if that's not radical, I don't know how you define radical. You know, so I'm pretty irate about it, and I'm not the only one. But you know, the problem is I don't want to get lumped in with every person who who lives in West Cambridge in a really low density area.
Right.
Because honestly, and Patrick makes this point very eloquently. Says that's really not where the new housing would get built. It would
Right.
basically go to what Dennis Carlones calls the soft sites. In other words, you know, the places where you can get most bang for the buck and where the costs already, the land costs are already going to be at least in the ballpark, you know.
Like
so,
where?
Well, like where I live, for example. You know, I don't think that
Isn't
you know
mid-Cambridge kind of expensive, though?
not as expensive as if you were out in some other parts of town.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm not
Right.
comparing to go 2138, but still,
Right.
it's not the port, and it's not,
No, I agree.
Riverside.
I agree. But you know, in a neighborhood like mine, which already has some apartment buildings, a
Right.
few even tall
On
ones,
Broadway,
and
yeah.
whatever, it's kind of a mishmash of different
Right.
types of housing styles, different densities, different heights. Some mix in my neighborhood, especially. There's even a little mix of residential and commercial, whatever.
Yeah, you're surrounded.
But the thing
by
is that
commercial.
everything's actually built pretty close to what the allowable limits are today. All right, and so that, but unfortunately, that would become the soft site where, in fact, much of this activity would probably end up being concentrated. And it's like I wouldn't mind a little change here and there, but goodness gracious, if I have to, if a 50-foot tall by 80-foot long wall gets built 5 feet from my kitchen window, and I have no right to say anything because it would be done completely as of right, then I think I have a right to be a bit upset, right? So yeah, do I feel betrayed by these city councilors? Yes, but we'll wait to see how things proceed. They're going to have a roundtable on this, I think, again
Yeah.
on April, what is it, 8th or something?
I don't.
It's coming up.
It's
soon.
the day after a city council meeting, right? Is that Tuesday?
It might be on a Tuesday,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
And then
No,
and
wait a minute,
then,
today's the 2nd.
but they also scheduled 2 more meetings of the
So,
housing
no, it would be that
committee
night.
as well.
Right. Well,
Right.
an ordinance committee and a housing committee? Or is
Not
that
yet,
something different?
not yet housing. Excuse me, not yet ordinance committee.
Okay, I thought
I
there was
mean-
a second reading to something last night. I
No,
don't know
there
what
was
that
I think there was a second reading to, was it the cannabis zoning?
Oh, you're right, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, I'm
yeah,
confusing.
Yeah.
it.
I mean, there are other things happening beside this, but this is unquestionably the sort of
This
centerpiece.
is drawing the most.
This is what's drawing a lot of the public comment, you know, and, you know, so it is in part, there are people who actually, you know, are residential property owners who have some serious concerns, you know, and then you have a better Cambridge crowd who decided that in fact they're, even though they began as a proponents of transit-oriented development, they've decided that that's no longer their mission. You know, their mission is just simply to promote the subsidized housing. You know, and that's where they're putting all their eggs in that basket now. And they're raising money and they're funding candidates.
Well, everyone funds cancer.
Well, actually, the thing is that there are organizations that endorse candidates. If there's any funding, it's relatively limited. It's usually restricted. Actually, sometimes the candidates pay the organization so they can put a list of names on and help in the printing costs, and then they distribute them in one way or another, right? You know, A Better Cambridge is actually raising money now, and it's actually getting it from the very same nonprofit developers who are actually the ones who would be beneficiaries of the overlay. So they're funding the organization, who are then going to endorse a bunch of candidates, and you know, so it's getting weird. It's
Right,
getting
but
really
I
weird.
guess, yeah, I mean, I don't know. At the end of the day, you hear not that much housing is going to get built anyway.
I don't think that's true, and I'll tell
Really?
you. Well, I mean,
And there's just so much money. There's just
All
so
right.
many places they can buy.
all right. So this is the
You know?
sleight of hand. And because I was there when they presented, because that's exactly the word it said. Don't worry, this is
Yeah.
only going to be a few projects per year. That'll be at maximum, based on the funding available at the time.
Right, but now we're increasing funding though.
Now,
Right.
so now not only are they going to increase the funding from out of the city budget, so they're
Yeah.
going to significantly
Is
increase
it
the
5
amount of
million a
funding.
year or is it 20 million a year?
No, they're talking about things that would be factored into the budget.
Okay.
But they're now, as part of the mechanism for short-term rentals, they
Yeah,
actually said, well, they want to dedicate at least 30% of any revenue from that toward this.
Guess what? That's not going to be a whole lot of revenue. I
And
know.
the,
I saw
and the
the
city
numbers.
manager said, oh, you wanted to go to 100%? Well, I would entertain that possibility too.
It's still not going to bring in
Plus,
millions of
any of the
dollars,
revenue
sorry.
from cannabis sales would
Well, that-
also, according to some
Yeah.
proposals,
that I
be
could see
dedicated to
getting
this.
more money from.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, if indeed a real estate transfer tax were to go through, so far every time I've heard that mentioned,
Yeah, where would that get dedicated?
then everybody says, well, that should go to this purpose as well.
But also arts and stuff. There's a lot of thing in that basket. Preschool.
Well, I think the cannabis zoning it was suggested that some of that should go for some arts funding and some things such as that. I haven't heard that on the real estate transfer tax proposal, which would be something that could only come from the state, so I don't know
Right.
that would actually happen.
Yeah.
But the point I'm making here simply is that if you actually put direct city budget money toward this, plus all these various other revenue sources, we're not talking about a small pot of money at this point. So we're really talking about doing potentially a really significant amount of new development. Now, and again, I'm not against segregated housing, but the thing is, if you've already got essentially built up neighborhoods, and you've just decided that let's target them now in order to tear down some buildings in order to put up much larger buildings, I think that's a pretty significant policy change. By the way, there's one other thing that I haven't heard anybody yet talk about, which is this, is that if you're a company like Justice Start or Homeowners Rehab, you already own properties.
Mm-hmm.
You can do this on the properties you already own. So if you, for example, got, out of some charity, you got a two-family house on a lot of a certain size, and you built that, and you turned it into affordable housing units, right? you could now basically build that one up to the quadruple density standard too. So you could do this in all these properties all around the city.
Well, they already own it, and it's already been designated as affordable housing.
But they were
so.
under the existing zoning code. So it's not.
So they can do it now. They don't have to.
To me, the issue is not the who lives there and the affordability, whatever. It's the what is an acceptable scale of building in already built neighborhoods.
Okay.
Right? Is it perfectly okay to basically drop in something that's quadruple the density that anybody else could possibly build? You know, just because you say you're doing the Lord's work.
Okay,
You know?
so all right, what would an alternative be? They can get the money from the city and all these other funds, but would have to get a special permit to do the kind of zoning they want to do. Would that be an alternative?
You know, the thing is
So in other words, they could afford to buy the building, but then they'd have to apply for special permits and
well, I mean, the thing
do
is,
the normal
but
stuff.
you got to get into this matter that what is the purpose of zoning? Now, I will be the first to acknowledge
Well,
that some zoning
But
restrictions have
people
been
get
abusive.
special permits all over the place here.
You get special permits when there is, in fact, a special permit process.
Well,
You do not have a special permit process for most residential development unless you're talking
don't?
about. Well, if you're doing things like in a planned unit development, you know, there are certain, like in the Central Square Overlay District, there are special permit processes where you can exceed height limits.
okay, so you gave an example of a homeowner that wanted to add something in the back and how they
Then you
go
have to
through
seek a
owner estates.
variance. That's not a special
Okay,
permit.
so all right, explain
And
the
they'd have to-
difference then.
Special permit
So
is
would they have to
granted by
get
the planning
variances then?
board. The
Okay.
variances, you have to go to the Board of Zoning Appeal and you have to argue that you have a hardship.
Well, if it's just a start or a homeowner's rehab, could they say we're trying to increase in our own property and we want this to do this?
They would have to then make a case that somehow they're facing a hardship. But the point is that when you buy a property, you buy it with your eyes open, you know, with a full understanding of what you can and cannot do with that property. You know, what this whole overlay is basically saying is let's completely change those standards. So that in fact, if you just happen to be one of those guys, then you have completely different set of zoning rules apply to you.
Well,
I mean, I'm of the opinion that if zoning means anything, it has
Yeah.
to be applied uniformly.
I agree.
You know?
I guess the bottom line to all this is I'd hate to see I mean, I really believe in the missions that the homeowners rehab and Just to Start do. They've done some incredible developments.
And
I'd
they
hate to
also
see-
own thousands of units in the city already.
Well, but why is that? Because maybe we've been welcoming to that, and that's good. Some people can live there now? Isn't that a good thing?
I think that's a good thing, but the thing is that it has always been built up to this point within the basic strictures that govern everybody.
So you're saying they can
You know?
continue to, but maybe because
They still
of
have to play by the rules.
the real estate climate has changed so much that they can no longer do that given the prices. that
Right,
are
but
there.
as that climate has changed, the
Yeah,
city has
then-
also implemented things like inclusionary zoning, which has
True.
basically produced more housing units.
Yeah, but
you
that
know,
has its own problems, true. I mean,
well,
it's good, but you're
I-
right. I mean, you feel
honestly,
like you're one of these people.
If the
that-
issue
yeah.
is, are you providing housing for people?
Okay.
I think inclusionary zoning has actually been a pretty damn good program.
Okay, but
and-
does it help house teachers and
It absolutely
nurses and stuff?
does.
It does? Okay, they're
fact,
part of that. It's
even
not just
more
low
so.
income? It's moderate income?
That's actually the beauty of inclusionary
Okay,
zoning.
all
The
right,
thing is
that's
that
good
when
to
you
know. Yeah.
built so-called affordable housing
Yeah.
using things like federal funds, it came with real strings attached to say, well, who you can
Right.
build it for,
Yeah.
right? So some of it was actually pretty low income.
Yeah.
The most beneficial program for providing housing for middle income people
Uh-huh.
was the housing that was built without any strings attached, because it was the money came from the private developers who
So
built
that
the
was
housing.
Okay.
So the city actually had far more
But didn't
flexibility.
they have a lottery for those things? And didn't you still have to apply for
Well,
that?
I mean,
And-
in any situation where
Yeah.
the demand exceeds the supply,
Right.
you're going to have a situation.
But you're saying more people of a moderate income, say someone
They
like
could
myself
actually,
could do that.
they could
Yeah.
allow
I see.
inclusionary units to go toward middle income, moderate
And do
income
they?
people.
You're saying they
and
do?
they do.
All right,
They do.
because to me, that is the missing
Right.
piece of this
Right.
also, where no one's
Well, but the
talking
thing
about
is,
the middle
so
income.
so then
Yeah.
then we're talking about inclusionary zoning as the better mechanism for
All right.
doing so.
Okay.
And in fact, at that housing working group with Envision Cambridge, they did propose what they called a super inclusionary
I saw that, yeah.
proposal that basically would allow additional density in exchange for,
And what
putting in
happened
a
to
higher
that?
percentage.
Yeah, I saw that in the first.
I don't think it's dead,
iteration.
but the thing is
Yeah.
that the decision was made by thems that be that in fact they
To
were
go
going to
back to
push
the other-
this
the affordable
particular
housing, yeah.
this particular program as opposed to focusing on the inclusionary, and I think that was a horrible
Yeah.
mistake, and
But the inclusionary only kicks in for 10 units or more, right?
yes,
So all these people buying up properties in like Cambridgeport and stuff that are building these boxes are generally under 10 units. They're 8 units, maybe.
typically, yeah, not
So I'm
entirely
just saying
though.
it doesn't.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
not solving that
honestly,
problem.
if there's one thing that one of the
I'd rather see
downsides-
all of those be affordable, frankly, than just have one. But
Right,
that's-
right, but-
I'm talking about small developments.
Right, but the issue about why have things become unaffordable is actually a much bigger question too.
Well, of course, that's
Right,
different.
I mean, and
Everyone wants
I
to live here,
well,
and it's happening all over the country. It's
it
not
is
just
happening all over the
Cambridge.
country. But
Yeah.
the thing is that the city of Cambridge made some decisions when it decided to sort of grow, life sciences,
Yeah,
the knowledge
biotech,
economy,
yeah,
whatever.
right.
So basically said, these are the people we want to work in Cambridge. So those people said, well, we also would like to live in Cambridge. And that's really what has driven so much of this,
True.
Well,
Well,
and
growth,
I
mean,
it's
what are
not,
you going to do?
But it's
I
not
mean,
just growth. It's also a modification of what a city is. Cambridge was a manufacturing city, and a lot of people lived here because it was a manufacturing city.
But things change, Robert.
Things have changed, so therefore the
Yes.
people who are wanting to live
Right.
here have changed too.
Right, and
And
that's
you
happening
to
all
some
over the
degree, you've got to
country.
go with the flow.
Yeah, right. So
I mean,
we're
if you
saying
work
both
if you
things.
work in Kendall Square, you have every right to want to live in
Yeah.
somewhere in Cambridge as well.
Well, they
you
could
know?
live in Boston too, but work.
Well,
in
and some
Kendall,
do,
yeah.
some do,
Yeah.
But then again, you can, in a lot of other jobs, there are a lot of places to live too, all up and down the Red Line. You can even go to Quincy and Braintree. It's not the end of the earth,
Right.
So
Okay.
anyway, we'll
Well,
talk
we'll be
about some
back.
more things. There's
Yes.
one new candidate as of today
Oh,
too.
okay, I'll
So
hear about
anyway,
that
we'll
one.
talk a little bit more
All right,
about
see
that
you in the next segment.
here on Cambridge Inside
Yeah.
Out.
Okay.